Yes, hello and welcome to this session. We are continuing our exploration of metadata, and I want to look at the way in which the underlying data model has to be taken into account by metadata. Sage CRM is experienced within a browser or a mobile device. That's its presentation layer. That presentation layer, the HTML that has built that, has to have been served from the application server, and it's a result of a request to the web server. So so the browser makes a request to the web server within the application layer of the system within the eWare DLL or within the Tomcat web apps. We have access to the different modules of Sage CRM. So we have the sales, the marketing, the customer service features, and all of the integration capabilities that Sage CRM has to the different Sage BMS products. Now, of course, underneath all of the application layer, there has to be the reality of the database. It's the database which holds the application data that we use. That's the stuff that we're interested in. And you know from our previous discussions that any screen inside Sage CRM is actually built from two types of data. You have the application data, which we know is the essential for business, and then we have the metadata, which is essential for describing how the screens actually work. So the metadata control of Sage CRM is system-wide. It covers the user interface and all of the access to the different modules of the integrated system. It determines who can access the system and who can use certain features. It determines what system settings, fields, templates, and resources are available. It determines when alerts, notifications, and business rules are triggered. And it also determines where documents and data are stored and messages, menus, and buttons are displayed. Most data in the Sage CRM is held inside a table with columns. Let's teach from the product. Let's go in and have a look at the database. So I'm just going to pop over here and have a look, and I'm going to use CRM, which is my instance of Sage CRM, and I'm going to have a look at select star from users. There we are. So I've said select star from users, and we can see that I'm able to pull back information directly from the user system. Now, most data in Sage CRM is like this. It's held within a table within columns. And what you can imagine is that that's the information about the system administrator. Everything about the system administrator is held in the user table as a single row. But there are some instances within Sage CRM where the data is not described as a single record coming from a single row in a database table, but rather the data that makes up a record is from a data set of several rows. So a single conceptual record is described using multiple rows from within inside the system. Now that's actually going to be something like the user settings table. So if I have a look at, say, select star from user settings, this table, if I run it, what we can see is that there are two principal columns which are holding data of much meaning to us, which is the user setting key and the user setting value field. And you can see that it's that's it. The columns that we see on the screen are what's inside the system. So it's a narrow table with a lot of rows. And you'll notice that these are tied to an individual user. So if I say where uset underscore user ID is equal to 4, here I'm looking at all of the user settings for the user Susan May. Now these settings then that belong to Susan May are actually the sorts of things that we would see if I went up into preferences inside the interface. You can see that I've come into Sage CRM. I'm looking at now the preferences option for this user. This happens to be the system administrator, but we can see that all of these different options are in place. Now, in these circumstances, then the process of building a screen or editing a screen is not as straightforward as when the information is based on a more classic way of describing the data, where a single record is held in a single row. Where we have this, then we can edit screens. And so if I go and look underneath administration, and go into customization and go down to look at the secondary entities, we can see here that there is a users option. So inside here, because the data is returned in this simple way, we have access to the fields, the screens, the lists that can be built on the users. So we can actually, this tells us we can start to enhance or change even the administration screens. In fact, there's positive options for us to be able to do that, because we can add in some additional fields into the user table for the administration. Very useful for the integrations between Sage CRM and the ERP systems. But if we look through here, there is no evidence of the user setting table. So the user settings table is not visible within the interface because it holds its data in a different way. It's not returning it as a single record. So that's one of the first things about the possibilities, really, between working with metadata and structures based on how data is modeled. Doesn't mean that metadata can't be used, because of course inside the preferences screen that we see here, these are all labels, and these labels or translations can all be changed, and we can even start to add in additional options into the menu in this context, and we can also start to change by adding in additional buttons into the button group on this screen as well. Excuse me. Now, going back into the presentation, where we've looked and considered holding data inside Sage CRM, so we're thinking about the way in which we hold data in Sage CRM, there are some other things to consider. Now, when we're interacting within Sage CRM, we're making requests to the application server from the browser. So the browser makes the request, comes into the application server. The application server in its design is holding all the metadata that describes the system, but it also extends to describe the business rules of the system. And it doesn't expect us to go down into defining any restrictive business rules inside the database itself. So we have an issue around this with, or support issues may occur if people are trying to put database constraints or foreign key constraints into the database. In the database itself, in any of this information, if we go and look at a table, whether it's the user table or whatever, the only ever constraint that's put into a database table inside Sage CRM, and here I'll look at the company and I'll look at the design of this, is that you can see that you have the idea of the primary key, which of course is not allowing any nulls. So it satisfies there the idea of key integrity. Now, that's the only database constraint that you would find inside the system. Don't put your own in other fields. Don't no customization should take place or no editing that should put any rules that are constraints, restrictive behavior, directly into the database. You can use stored procedures and you can use triggers. Those are discouraged though, but as long as they're not blocking behavior, there's not going to be any clash with behavior inside Sage CRM. Now, I outlined there that there are some times when the data model gets a little bit strange, and there are places within the system where the data model is complex. I'm not going to talk about the outliers, but you've got things like the key attributes area, which are certainly very complex ways of imagining the data. And if you want to know more about that, then that can be read up within blog articles and the documentation that are on the Help Center and also on the community. When we go on to thinking about the consequences of the simplicity of the data sets that we're using with, it does have also a rider, and sometimes we'll have issues in which we'll need to provide some support to partners, customers. Now you can only use metadata definitions for screens where the data is in a single row. So the example here is the company summary screen. Now I'm going to go off inside here. Now look at Gatecom. You can see that I've called my summary screen, and you can see that I've got my different screens that are addressed inside this area. And we've talked about this before, the fact that a large system action, the system action is hard-coded, but it will in turn have references to metadata to say it wants to load in a particular set of screens. The company summary screen loads in the company box long, the address box short, and the person box short. Let's see how we know that we can do this. This is where we can start to think about what's going on inside the logs. I'm going to open up the logs, clear out the log for today, and I'm going to just refresh this screen. So I've got a log open, and as this log opens, the line that I'm interested in is right at the top here, which is when the page is being opened up. So I'm just going to take that set of lines and concentrate on what's going on here. Now you can see that I've got a select statement being fired to the database. In this case, I'm using the system administrator, so I don't have the full HTML, full SQL that would be fired perhaps by a user like Susan May or one of the other demo users, because they would be governed by security, and I'll be mentioning security in a moment. So we've got our select statement. That select statement that is generated from the system, if I choose to run that, we can see that this returns a single record. Now, because it's returning a single record, immediately we actually have the knowledge that it can be mapped into a screen very easily. And so the same view is underlying all of these different screens that we see referenced here. If I go into the administration area and I look at where we've got our company, and I look to the company box long, got the definition of our company box long, and we can start to see that it's pulling up the information from the company, but it knows that the underlying view is delivering the information it needs to in this context. What that's all about is that you've got this simple definition of a single row, describes the company, describes an address, describes a person. But when we come on to other areas like the user settings, like the phone and email screens, or even areas within the administration screens where the information is held inside system parameters, there it changes, because those are not covered in a simple single way. I said that there's no way that we can go and find the user settings table in here. You'll look and it won't be there, but it doesn't mean that we can't change some aspects of it. But this idea of advanced customization also affects other tables within the system. And this is what we're coming on to now. I want to think here about the way in which entities are constructed. The word entity is used very frequently throughout the documentation, throughout the training materials, through everywhere. It's a ubiquitous word that is used. In terms of databases, if you were thinking of it in terms of relational database theory, then normally the word to describe a single table that holds a single item is going to be the idea of a relation, or that forms the relationships within the relational database. And that is very often synonymous with the word entity. So if I think about a company, only those columns which are particular to the definition of the company, not its address, not who works for it, not the phone numbers associated with it, but simply the details only to do with the company would be held in the company entity. But when we use the word company in a general business sense, we actually can't separate out the idea of a company from a contact within the company. If you write a letter to a company, you're writing it to a person. If we're sending an email, we're emailing a person. And if we are going to visit a company, then it's obviously visiting it at an address. So when we tend to talk about entities inside Sage CRM, we're actually talking about this larger business object that more closely mimics or describes the common understanding of what that entity is, that thing is. And so it's used all the way through in terms of security, workflow, any of the processes that we design and the business rules that we design. We even upload into the company as well, and if we're carrying imports of data. And there are structures of when we're creating our reports and groups. So this entity is very important, but because it's straddling more than one table, ultimately it's down to views. This is the idea that views govern the entity, and what's more, different views are used for different purposes. So the context is important because the full data that is used in any particular place is going to be defined on the view that is used. Again, all described within the context of metadata. And here we've got our simple and complex entity relationship where we can think of different areas of the system and the views will be simpler. In some parts, very straightforward. If we think about what makes up a company, companies have to be linked to a person, to the address, to a lot of information. But actually, if I go and select, if I just do a select star from lead, this entity is very simple because it's got everything within it. So it's low quality contact information, that's the the idea of a lead, but here you can see we've got company information, we've got address information, we've got person information, all things that when they're promoted into being a full contact within the system would go into the company table, the phone table, the email table, but everything here is in this initial lead area. Now, this idea of complexity and views becomes quite important when we are thinking in terms of the data model as well. And here we have to be sensitive when we're saying if there's a support issue or we're looking at something that may or may not go wrong. We have to be sensitive that underlying this is probably a view, and we need to investigate exactly the context in which a problem occurs, the view that's being used, and the nature of the data model and the data relationship in this context. So consider, if I go as a user to look at a company gatecom, and I look down in here, you can see that I've got multiple people within inside the company. This screen is the person list screen, and it's based on a view. And it's a view that will be bringing in information from the person table within the context of the list, within the context of the company. And I can start to mimic what we're doing here. So I can go in and say select star from company. Now I happen to know that we're dealing with the company gatecom, so I can say where comp_company ID is equal here to 28. So I'm pulling back, and there you can see in the results pane that's come down here how I'm looking at gatecom's details. Now if I say select star from person, where pers_company ID is 28, I can see the three people that belong to the company. So I've got Simon Yaltoy, David Costello, and Mike Carlson displayed on my screen. But what if I now want to report or find information about the type of person that this contact is? If I look here, you can see that David Costello is a sales contact. Now, if I go in and work with David, you can very clearly see that if I click change, I can decide to change the type of contact that he represents. So is he sales? I think he's also an administrative contact, and I can choose save. And now if I'm looking at the level of the company again, that information is shown inside the people list. We can see that he's also an administrative contact. But where is that held? It's not held inside this person record. So if I look for it, I will not see in the person record any information about that person being an administrative contact. There's another table involved here, and this is the person link table. So if I go and look at select star from person link, I can put a restriction in here where the penny company ID, so person link company ID, is equal to 28, and I can now see that I've got all of these different contacts. You can see the link to the contact in the person ID referenced here, and then the company ID is referenced here as well, and you can see the person link type has been added as a row. So we've got a row being used here to describe an information, but the full set of data is only available for that person across multiple rows of data. And so we have a challenge of How do we define this? How do we use this? Where is it seen? Now, contact type is important because it's used for certain of the interactions with certain account systems. So you're going to synchronize whoever is the principal contact. So this is a relevant context within a support context. So here I might actually want to create something, and I've got, if you look down here, I've got training, admin, finance, operations, sales, support. I might want a marketing contact in here. So how do I do this? Well, the trouble with person link as a table is that it's dealing with a meta set, so it doesn't have a representation here. The person link table is not revealed as a customizable table. So it's got to be done in another way, and it's done using translations. Now, you have to understand that this is not an automatic, oh, of course, I can't find it as a table, I must be able to find it here. This is something that is very particular, and translations are being used in a very particular way to support this. But this is not a unique thing. It's used across a range of different areas. So if I go and find the link area, link, and I think the caption is link comp pairs, I can go and find these, and these are all of the different existing types of caption defined within the system. And these are used to describe the nature of the relationship. So if I want to here now add in marketing as an option, I can do that. So I can create a new caption, goes into the link comp pairs caption family. I will call this marketing as my caption code. The caption family type, I'll just put choices in here, and then marketing as the translation, and I'll choose save. So we've got our translation built, and if I look to the company and I then look to the people within that company and start editing one of these people, and click change, what we can see is that our marketing has now been added in as an available type. Now this inclusion in the screen is down to a little bit of DLL work. So the DLL has knowledge that within this context of the system action 222, it needs to do some work with these to convert this into a series of checkboxes. But the fact that the marketing option has been added by changing translations indicates that it's still very much under the control of metadata.